Kyle, let's hot take this. It's on my mind a little bit. Are there predictable, non-trivial historical patterns of behavior in a larger society?
Welcome to the Deep Chat.
Behavior like uprising, war, peacetime, those sorts of behaviors?
Yeah, those are pretty broad behaviors, yes. But yes, the general movement of a society in one direction or another, the rise and fall, the protesting versus not protesting, peaceful versus not peaceful, youth rising up versus not. Uh-huh. Is that just a pattern that occurs due to the emergent behavior of a society and what's going on in it, and the time that you grow up in and what you impart upon your kids? And then that cycle continues where if there's relative peace, people start to become more aggressive over time, etc. Mm-hmm. I'm just saying, is there a pattern here?
Well, on a short term, sure. In the same way the weather is highly predictable the shorter your window is. I can tell you very precisely what the temperature near my home is going to be 5 minutes in the future at any time. I take the current measurement and I adjust a little bit based on time of day, and I pretty much know. Can I predict the temperature a week from now at this time of day? No, because the dynamics are too complex to try and extrapolate out that far.
God, I wish you could, though, because we would certainly retire.
Right.
That would be a modeling effort like you wouldn't believe. Yeah. But I hear you. What about the temperature in the fall next year in Southern California?
Well, yeah, so then that's interesting. Now you're zooming out a little bit and you're saying like monthly average temperature, and you lose the resolution of the day-to-day where some of the noise is. You'd have to account for global warming and these sorts of things, but could I predict the monthly average pretty well? Yeah, I bet I'm not trained in meteorology or anything like that. I am trained in statistics, and I'm confident with those skills alone, I could do a decent job predicting average monthly temperature.
All right, sentiment, right? Sentiment analysis. Sure. You know a lot about it.
Yep.
Could you predict the average sort of mood and attitude or sentiment of the entire population in the month of October or December?
Not in a particularly scientific way. I don't think so. What could I do? I could do something like analyze the Twitter fire hose, get all the tweets that people are sending, all the hashtags, and do some sort of analysis on it. All I've done there is measure a bias sample of people who have self-selected to publish things on Twitter, and also probably statements that don't really reflect how they feel. They more reflect what they need to get out in a lot of cases,
But that's an emotion. That's an emotion. That's a sentiment. That's, it's the zeitgeist. I mean, for lack of a better word. So that's really kind of what we're talking about, the high-level zeitgeist of a nation and what's going on.
Yeah. The question is begging some method of, like, we're fishing here for, we do that, and we have some formula that says, oh, clearly people are venting on Twitter. That means they're escalated, but because the venting is above 6.5, we know they won't riot. I don't think there's anything that SimCity mechanical about it.
There is no way that there isn't companies or intelligence agencies that have done something like this, in my head. Attempted. I mean, how sure. predictable it is, I don't know. But, right. This is more on, there's utility in something that might take the sentiment and try to project it onto the next few months or next year. Next year at this time, are we going to be feeling generally malaise, right? Or are we going to be an upbeat society? Because how the society feels in general could be used to determine what the stock market's going to do. The society feels good. Okay, stock market, maybe it doesn't move up, maybe it doesn't move down, but we feel better that, sentiment helps. I think that's a general truth for the stock market, is that when the people feel good and aren't fearful, they put money out there. Obviously, you have to have the money, but...
You're building a plausible story, but I wouldn't take for granted that it's true without the data.
Right. So... it seems there's utility in the near term, like the next year or the next 6 months. What is the behavior or the sentiment of a nation or a general populace, right? It doesn't have to be a nation. Could be, Los Angeles.
Yeah.
I mean, it's 14 million people. It could be a nation, right?
Yeah.
Then if you zoom out yet more, there's the arc of a civilization. Well, that's too big. Civilizations... like hundreds of years, if I'm not mistaken, if not more, thousands.
Rome, yeah.
But there's the arc of a nation, a powerful nation. Looking at the arc that happens within the nation is probably the farthest you can zoom out, or the world, that would be the farthest. But then there's the nation, and then within that there's like the arc of unrest or arc of wartime versus not wartime. And that's probably the level at which it doesn't necessarily become as useful, but it's very interesting. And what I mean is it's not very useful in terms of using it to, I don't know, make more money, or using it to decide what actions we take now to offset any issues we see in the future, because it's too broad of a brush.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if it worked, it'd be very informative. There's lots you could do. Public health stuff that could be informed by it.
Oh, true. Right. Public health. If you could say the next 20 years, right?
Right.
That things happen in these cycles, you could use that to say, okay, we need to be prepared for civil unrest in 15 years.
All right, look, I just refuted the thing in one concept. Here's the counterfactual. 9/11.
Right, which changes the inflection of everything, right?
One very small event, caused ostensibly by a very small number of people. You could say, like, oh, we predict there's going to be events like that, but to pinpoint it and say it was one that was so significant, so successful, so damaging, utterly changed the course of the entire world in some respects. That's not predictable.
When 9/11 happened, it changed the course of the next year, for sure. It changed the course of the next 2 years, for sure. So my lower level, can you sort of predict what's happening in the next year or two, can be totally destroyed by an event like that. That's kind of what we're saying. I think I agree with you there. But when you zoom out to 20 years or 30 years or 50-year cycles, does that just become part of the noise? Because we've had those events before.
I think you have to assume it is. Here, Brett, what are the trends in technology going to be in 20 years?
I mean, it's not...
Ludicrous question.
A ludicrous question, but like the... what is...
So it's,
I always forget
it's
the
2021.
Power, right?
Go back to 2001. We know the trends of today. Would we have mentioned any of them 20 years ago? Serverless, containerization, space communication.
Well, or from a broader... This is a good example. Broader perspective, right? If we take in the last 20 years, because we've been working in computers for that amount of time, professionally. If we take that 20 years... One of the things that's really influenced the entire world is social media and Twitter. In 2001, if we projected forward in some way and said, are we going to have civil unrest in 2020, which we did, right? How would we know that based on the information we had in 2020 or 2001 or 2000? Well, Twitter didn't exist. And I would contend that social media and Twitter were one of the big reasons why we have social unrest. But would it have happened anyway, right? We had social unrest in the 70s. Or was it late 60s, 70s, early 70s, without social media. And we had legitimate problems. So did social media change it or just enable it? And would it have happened anyway? Look, I don't know what to...
Sure.
I didn't hot take this, and my answer would have been, if I was to hot take it, my answer would have been no.
Mm-hmm.
We can't predict. There's no major cycle of nations because there's too many variables. But I'm trying to be the devil's advocate and say that if we filter out the noise, do nations move in this sort, and groups of people move in a predictable-ish fashion?
This is one of those things where if you're committed to saying yes, you can find a scientific truth here. Like, look at signals like unemployment and inflation, and, there are these indicators that are telling in some way. So there is some science here to make useful predictions. But the part that makes me wary, especially when people talk about cycles, is I get the sense that people using terminology like that think it's cyclic the way the cicadas coming back are, where it's very mechanical and it's going to happen. When I believe the world as influenced by human beings is so much more dynamic. Like the weather, it's complex and hard to predict, but it follows the Navier-Stokes equations and stuff like that. It's very dynamical systems, the mathematics describe weather. They don't describe all of the crazy ideas and innovative ideas humans have that can have very fast change in the world.
Well, let's say this. I agree. I'm going to, again, playing devil's advocate. You've known someone who gets angry in your life, right?
A few, yeah.
And the typical pattern with people who get angry easily, or not even easily, there's people who hold it in, and then all of a sudden they blow up over something strange. Doesn't matter what it is, right? It could be my dad was a cop, and he had to control it. And then, something would get caught on his pant leg, and he'd tear it out of the wall. Right? Mm-hmm. So understandable given the pressure he was under. And if you take that analogy as one person, and then you extend that to billions of people, that there's a time where everybody's kind of relaxed and they're able to hold it in. Their noise floor, so to speak, for anger or frustration is low. And then at some point that noise floor starts to etch up because society starts talking about agitating things, or agitating things start happening, and they need to let off steam, right? And then they let off the steam, like the volcano, and then all of a sudden there's this release of pressure and everybody calms down for a cycle. That's where I can make the argument that there could be some legitimacy to it, but I don't know enough about what would be, there's probably evolutionary biology or evolutionary psychology. I don't know. There's probably some bizarre subfield of psychology and biology that has talked about this, right? And I wonder if there is some possibility there.
Maybe. I mean, I know in biology they do some differential equation stuff to study animal populations. The introductory one you see is I think rabbits and foxes, that those two populations have a strong mathematical relationship. If the hunting gets too aggressive, the population of rabbits goes down, the foxes start to starve, the rabbits can come back. And you can plot out that dynamical system, and apparently it fits the real world pretty good. So, maybe there is some pressure and release thing. It's plausible, it's testable if you state it well, but I think it's going to be hard to pin down the exact claim, because a pressure release valve could take the form of people with pitchforks and torches, or it could take the form of litigation or social media, outrage. Maybe there's lots of forms of release valve, and that evolves culturally through time.
Right. Let's say 9/11 happened at a time where we were at our very most prosperous, which it might have, I think, right? That was post Bill Clinton.
I don't know how you measure that, but I'll go with it.
Well, prosperity in terms of general mood of society.
So we were asking for it.
I think.
Why would that be causal? Think about it. Why would our prosperity?
No. Let me build this case. I'm saying, what would have happened if everybody was really content and 9/11 happened? Would we still have had the profound impact? Or, would we have gone and done what we did? Or would we have said, okay, you know what? We're more peaceful. We're not going to worry as much about it and start a 20-year, $5 trillion war. But if it happened when everybody was already heightened, would the response have been even bigger? You see what I mean? So if I am already angry and someone pokes me on the street, I'll probably have a bigger response. But if I'm totally at peace and I just came from the best day of my life, and I might just say, hey, it's cool. Just leave me alone.
Right.
Okay. Again.
There might have been other, equally as patriotic or whatever you want to label it, approaches that were more effective, differently effective. We picked the one we picked. Would we have picked something else if there was a lot of unrest? What if 9/11 had happened 2 days after George Floyd?
Right, exactly. Or months after last summer, right? Right in the middle of it all.
At any point, any day of the summer.
I mean, let's get them, right? It's interesting. Now, okay, to your point, what if right in the middle of George Floyd, another George Floyd happened? Now, I know there were some things that did happen in the months ensuing, but something equally ugly.
And public and prominent, and
just as public and equally, I mean, it would have definitely set off more protests and more riots. I don't think there's a doubt in my mind, and they could have been yet more violent. But that pressure release did happen at some point, right? I mean, they destroyed Santa Monica.
Melrose.
For the most part, and parts of Beverly Hills and Melrose. We've seen it. We've seen the boarded up stores. Was that something that made everybody feel better and release the pressure? Because we haven't seen as much of it. Like, why don't they just continue perpetually? Are people less agitated? Did we do something to help them? I don't think so.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I've never participated in a riot, and it doesn't seem like my scene. I can't fathom how one gets going, in a way. Like, once one has started, I guess I kind of understand the human mentality of like, oh, we're getting away with stuff, we're kind of carried away in something, but there is an interesting dynamic at play. I don't think any one person starts a riot.
Well, but again, it goes back to the mentality, right? I'm holding up my hands, and I put one hand higher. That's the noise floor. Mm-hmm. That's the anger floor. For the people who are right near that anger floor, and somebody throws, or someone who comes to the protest and is already so angry that they're willing to throw a brick, they throw that brick because they're already above their noise floor. And then that other person who's right below that noise floor, anger floor, so to speak, goes, you know what? Yeah. Mm-hmm. That sounds good. And then they throw a brick, and there's this cycle that makes the volcano sort of explode. The group dynamics, right?
And then we storm the Capitol.
Well, exactly. And then we storm the Capitol. It's the same thing. It's this group dynamic that starts to evolve. Now, we can see and we can make an argument for why that happens on the local level in those small incidents, right? I mean, it's plausible that there's a trigger point and for lack of a better word, the anger or noise floor peaks.
Yeah.
But can that argument be made for nations and world over, dozens, decades?
Yeah, no, I mean, if the claim is, oh, look over the history, there are ups and downs, there are times of peace and times of war, what's the alternative? It would be weird to describe something else. Maybe it'd be perpetual war, but that sounds like that wouldn't end well. So I think...
feelings of inequality, differences in class, the distance between the upper class and lower class. Mm-hmm. Is that predictable? Not even predictable, but does it happen in waves? Will our last year or 2 years result in yet more inequality or less? I mean, obviously, economically, we printed a ton of money, and we know where that money went. It didn't go to, the lower class. It went mostly to the upper class. So did we just increase the division, or will this result in some kind of legislation that cycles us back to some middle ground? We talk about the pendulum swinging in politics. Does it swing in behaviors?
Uh-huh.
Okay, we swung this way, and deregulation, et cetera, all that during Reagan, and now we're swinging the other way where we're trying to crack down on that, and then are we going to meet somewhere in the middle? How's it going to happen? Because right now, I think we can agree the country is more divided than it ever has been. I'm not sure that's true.
Yeah, I don't know. I've only been around for a while, but yeah.
But that's what's said. Well, everybody thinks it's more divided than it's ever been.
Always, yeah.
Right, always. I mean, that's what our parents used to talk about. Oh, this and all that. And,
but certain things were much better at the same time, right?
Right, yes, exactly. Things were much better in certain areas, but horrible.
2 parts nostalgia, 3 part, yeah.
Japan was going to take over the United States when I was a kid. I don't know if you remember that.
Oh, a little bit with like LCDs in the auto industry. There was...
manufacturing.
Yeah, manufacturing in general.
Yeah, so...
Oh, in high school, I just remember, this brought a weird memory. I was shown this thing I don't think I should have been shown. It was like this very anti-Japan documentary about how like dastardly their practices were. I forgot we had to watch that.
Probably. That was the indoctrination, right? And it was persistent, and there were enemies and there was division. But it's hard when you're a kid to look back. It's hard as an adult to look back when you're a kid and say, was that real division? It feels pretty real right now. It feels like, with the COVID vaccine and we're going to mandate it and you have to do it, that is just going to increase division even more.
Maybe. Or are we just getting all the extremes? Technology has amplified the fringes.
Right. And that's the question. Is it any more extreme than it was before? Is it any more divided? I don't know. But goes back to the central question we were talking about. Is it not necessarily predictable? Do these things happen in waves? Right. peaks and valleys imply some form of predictability. So we'll have to dig and see if we can find someone who can actually speak to that, or different people who can talk about the ways in which a mathematician might look at it or a biologist might look at it, because I don't know that there's an answer to this question. If there is, it's probably kept behind closed doors.
No, it wouldn't have been discovered by the NSA. It would have been found by some sociologist guy with a database, or girl with a database.
It sounds like it might have been a whole team.
Yeah, actually, you're right. You're exactly right. Yeah.
It's too much work there, but I think it would require multiple disciplines, right?
Most likely. You definitely need a lot of compute power involved here. Probably someone on the modeling side, because you're inferring something. Pure machine learning wouldn't be the right tool for a problem like this. You have to kind of assert your model.
Well, okay, so let's say you could definitely make a general prediction. This is what I always love about when people talk about the Bible, right? The Bible predicts famine. The Bible predicts a flood, or I can't remember all the locusts. And
sure.
Yes, but it doesn't say when, right? If you say, I can guarantee you that there's going to be an earthquake in Southern California.
Yeah. You're right? 100% correct.
I am 100%, and I will be forever.
Right. Unless we ask questions about magnitude and location.
In that respect, the precision is in question.
Yeah.
Right? Because I do think that you can see the waves. Like, well, usually unrest is followed by a period of calm. I mean, you could say that that's probably
sure
based on
it would have to be
my sniff test.
If you said you can't stay in unrest for too long, it either will fizzle out or boil over. That's a plausible claim, sure.
Then it becomes a when and to what magnitude, right? If you can now say, okay, in X year, whatever it is, there will be civil unrest. A year's not that specific, but it's specific enough on large scale terms to be interesting. Like if you could do that. If you said January of 2020, I'd say there's no way. A year, I might say, okay, I'm hesitant. I don't know how that would work. 10 years, somewhere in that 10 years, yeah. I mean, it's reasonable to say there will be some unrest.
Sure.
So it's a question of fidelity.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So we'll try to find somebody here.
That'd be good. Yeah, I would love to know more about the degree to which these methods work, like how fine-grained they can get on predictions. I think we are sort of aligned on that. They're useful, but not a magic looking glass to tell us the future. But I am curious about the ways in which it's actionable. What do we do with the predictions that are reliable? Can they influence policy? Do they inform executive choices? What do we do with this stuff?
Good questions.